Hey everyone, I'm Abby from Abby's Kitchen. Welcome back to our series, Enlightened by Intuitive Eating. Now, in our last video, we discussed principle number 2 of intuitive eating, honor your hunger. So if you haven't watched that video, go check it out by clicking right here and then come back to watch this one. I want to start by, of course, giving a big thank you to Alyssa Rumsey and Amy Gloin, who are intuitive eating coaches and fellow registered dietitians, for reviewing this content. I'm going to leave some information about Alyssa and Amy in the description if you're looking for some one-on-one support. Now, before we get started, I want to answer a reader question. Dear Abby, I want to eat intuitively, but I am fully vegan, and I'm worried that these concepts may be at odds since I do restrict animal products in my diet. I also worry that if I don't track, that I may come up short on important nutrients. Can I be an intuitive eater without giving up my moral values around veganism? This is such a great question, and one that I've been asked a lot about. So the answer is absolutely. It's important to first take a look at, why you're choosing to live a vegan lifestyle. Are you eating vegan to lose weight? Are you trying to prevent yourself from eating bad foods? These are reasons that are obviously not in line with the principles of intuitive eating. Even if it's not currently why you're vegan, think back to determine if controlling foods, detoxing, or restricting without dieting was part of your initial reason for going vegan. I really want you to ask these questions and do a deep dive to get to the root of how and why you're living a vegan lifestyle to ensure that it's still there to support you and your well-being. Most vegans who have a good relationship with food abstain from animal products for ethical, environmental, and/or spiritual reasons. As part of a vegan lifestyle, many vegans do not even identify animal products as food. So just like you or I wouldn't call paper food or dirt food or poison food, they would view animal products as inedible. So in this case, avoiding or restricting animal products isn't the same as restricting food for the purposes of weight loss or clean eating. It's simply that the person doesn't see animal products as being part of their food environment. So limiting or restricting them is not an act of denial. It's actually a really similar experience for somebody who eats kosher or someone with an anaphylactic allergy to peanuts. Their food environment does not include pork or peanuts in those examples, so the dietary choice is not coming from the same sense of scarcity that one might experience with dieting. It's also important to note that veganism is not about restricting food groups. You can still have grains, you can still have vegetables and fruit, and you can still get your protein from amazing plant-based sources like tofu, tempeh, nuts, seeds, etc. As for the question of how do I ensure I'm getting all of the necessary nutrients I need without obsessing, I think there's a big difference between a meal plan and meal planning. I think a good dietitian could definitely help take a look at your current eating habits and focus in on how those habits affect your micronutrient intake with some recipe ideas and some meal planning support, not a strict meal plan. So this might involve keeping tabs on what you're eating for just a few days, not forever, and then together looking at what you're eating to see which staples contribute those really important nutrients and what are some options to maybe add in the event that things are coming up short. Ideally, we should not have to eat the same thing every single day to ensure that we're getting enough of those nutrients. But I also appreciate that we may need a little bit of guidance here or there when you're in those early days of transitioning to a fully plant-based diet. So to summarize, a vegan diet that is aligned with intuitive eating would mean not restricting any particular kind of food group and allowing yourself permission to eat all of the foods that you identify as being food. So I hope that clears things up. Now in this video, we're going to be discussing principle number 3, make peace with food. This is a really important part of the intuitive eating series because it really emphasizes the importance of rebuilding your relationship with food. And as always, these principles are coming from the intuitive eating book by dietitians Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch, so I will leave the link to that below. It is a must buy. Now, when it comes to intentional weight loss diets, they all have one main thing in common: restricting certain foods or amounts of foods. And this is exactly why I believe the research suggests that diets are not effective long term. They force you to ban certain foods from your diet and assign good or bad labels to them. Funny thing is, when we restrict food, we tend to want it more than anything. And when we get it, the reward center of our brain starts firing off. This principle actually applies to pretty much anything. Think about when you're sick and you're stuck in bed for like a week. After a few days, all you want to do is go outside and breathe in some fresh air. When we can't have something, we tend to want it even more. We appreciate it even more. Kids are notorious for this as well. If you tell them that they can't do something, let's just say, I don't know, go into your bedroom, you'll eventually find them in your bedroom. Or like when I was a teenager and my dad said that I could not wear the skimpy crop top to school, it made me want to wear it even more. Why? Because as humans, we don't like limitations. We don't like being told no. And we certainly do not like feeling deprived. So in general, deprivation can actually increase our desire for something. The more you can't have something, the more you just want it because it's now viewed as something super novel and special. So as soon as you restrict food, you place it in this special box. It becomes so special compared to any other type of food. Sure, you can go without it for a while, but eventually just thinking about it all day, every day, makes the restriction so unbearable and you crack. A good example of this is chocolate. A lot of people say that they can't have chocolate around them because they're just gonna eat it all in one sitting. I mean, we did a whole video all about food addiction, so definitely check that out right here. So what do these people do? Well, they don't have it at all and they keep it out of their house. Very typical. I read about this all the time. But very quickly, chocolate becomes built up to be this magical, forbidden food with an enormous amount of power over us. Once we finally come in contact with chocolate again, which, let's be real, it happens, we can't help but overindulge while it's available because it's going to be restricted again shortly after. Another example is the days right before starting a diet. Right before we go on a diet full of deprivation, many people will go for a last supper and eat as much as they can of all the bad foods that they want. But actually, this tends to backfire because we are, again, just telling ourselves that these foods will be missed. These foods are special. So if you have a ceremonious dinner before you start a diet, chances are that it's not the best diet to be on. Does any of this sound familiar? Honestly, I see it every single day, and I too have experienced it myself, so I can absolutely appreciate it. But let's talk about some of these restrictive diets, because a lot of the times, just in casual banter and discussion, I hear from my friends and family that, oh, it's going really well, but then there's almost always something that comes up that causes a person to cave or fail. So here are a few of many examples. Food competition. This is a get it while you can mentality. Now, good food marketers know that FOMO is a real thing. And by making food scarce, you feel like you need to load up on it and eat as much as possible before it's gone. This could apply to like your favorite dish or a bag of chips in the cupboard. Just knowing that it won't be there for very long creates an intense desire to eat as much of it as you can. Number 2, returning home. I know I've got a lot of great students who are watching my videos, and for anyone that goes away for school, you know the amazing feeling of raiding your parents' cupboards for food when you come home. If we go a long time without the foods that we're used to or we love, we start to miss it. Then, once we have access to it again, we may sometimes go a little bit overboard. This, of course, can happen with sweets and treats, but it can also happen with other foods as well. So, for example, a lot of people say that they miss salad after being on an all-inclusive vacation. I mean, remember that video that I did about intuitive eating on vacation? Like, all I wanted was salad and fresh raw vegetables like crazy. Case in point, we don't like restricting ourselves on either end of the spectrum. Number 3 is the clear your plate mentality. So this mentality was especially true during the Great Depression when food was very scarce. Many families encouraged children to clean their plate as it was totally wasteful to throw food out. This mentality has been passed on for many generations. Now, before I go any further, I want to just quickly flag that I am in no way recommending that we throw out and waste food. I'm gonna be talking a lot more about food waste and intuitive eating in an upcoming video, so stay tuned for that. I just wanna highlight the emotional and psychological toll that this mentality can have on a relationship with food. So if you commonly are depriving yourself, you may feel guilty about wasting a dish while you're eating out, and then of course you end up overdoing it and eating past your satiety signals. Instead, if you were in control of your eating and had a good relationship with food, you would know that you could bring this food home for leftovers and you could have it for lunch the next day, or perhaps you could just share that dish with a friend. There are lots of different options that we can explore. Okay, so how is dieting possible? Now, if our biological and psychological aversion to dieting is so strong, then how do people diet? Well, if you've watched my previous episodes, you know I have a strong admiration for our brilliant body. It's seriously so intelligent. People who diet all the time, aka chronic dieters, are able to adapt to long-term dieting through an adaptation process called restrained eating. They become so accustomed to ignoring their internal hunger cues that they just don't hear them anymore. These people tend to set up extremely strict rules and completely ignore anything their body and friends are telling them. They're able to stay on the diet for quite some time until one of their strict rules eventually is broken or their willpower gives out. Essentially, they view their rules as all or nothing. I used to be this person when I was struggling with orthorexia, and even still, I'm not as comfortable living in the gray. So is there research to back this up? Yes. There's quite a bit of research to support the ineffectiveness of diets that promote deprivation. In one study, researchers split female college students into 3 groups: no milkshake, 1 milkshake, or 2 milkshakes. After they ate the milkshake, they were asked to enter a private room and sample different types of ice cream. They were all encouraged to have as much of the ice cream as they wanted. 2 interesting things were found. Number 1, those who were classified as dieters ate significantly more ice cream than those who were classified as non-dieters. And second, the dieters that had milkshakes were much more likely to overeat ice cream, suggesting that a preload of bad food triggered them to forego their diet and eat as much as possible, knowing that restriction would soon be following. The non-dieters easily regulated their eating and stopped when they were satisfied. On the other hand, the dieters were unable to regulate their intake, which is a process called counter-regulation. The researchers determined that encouraging the dieters to overeat caused them to forego their restrictive inhibitions and, as a result, overeat. This overeating effect by dieters is known as the what the hell effect. Essentially, the dieters believe that since they've broken the rules of their diet, they might as well just go and overdo it and eat all the things. In another study, researchers found that overeating was a combination of restraint and impulsivity. If a person restricted food and it exacerbated their drive for the food, aka increased impulsiveness, then they were more likely to overeat it. A good way to demonstrate this is a seesaw example. On the one end of the seesaw, we have deprivation and restriction, and on the other end of the seesaw, we have guilt. When we're on a diet, we restrict and restrict, which causes one end of the seesaw to go up higher and higher. On the other hand, we feel less guilty because we're not eating any of the bad foods. So as deprivation goes up, guilt goes down. But if you've ever been on a seesaw, you know that it reaches a limit. Deprivation can only go so high before it comes crashing back down. Once it does, we see guilt go flying up. In other words, you feel like shit because you caved. This is why dieting is hardly ever sustainable. It creates this up and down effect that causes chaos in our mind and body. However, let's say you balance out your deprivation and restriction. You don't restrict anything, but you're in tune with your body's true needs. This also balances out your feelings of guilt because you no longer are feeling bad about overindulging and you're not flying high on the fact that you're eating perfectly. As a result, you're in balance. So how do you make peace with food? Now, I know you're thinking, okay, Abby, that's great and all, but how do I even start? The answer is to give yourself 100% unconditional permission to eat. No restrictions, no rules, just pure permission. I also want to flag that while this sounds super scary and also like, how the hell can this be healthy? I'm going to just eat chips and ice cream all day long, and a dietitian is saying that is cool. Know that this is not all intuitive eating is. To believe that is completely misconstruing the concept and the research that supports it. Intuitive eating has 10 important principles that build on one another, and we need to reject the diet mentality and make peace with food so you can rekindle your trust with your food and body before we can implement gentle nutrition guidelines. This is really important, and we will get there, but there are a few important steps that we need to get through first. Until you 100% believe that you're allowed any food, you will always feel a sense of deprivation, even if there isn't physical deprivation happening. So what does this look like? Well, first of all, we need to toss out the idea that there are morally good foods and bad foods. I will not deny that foods may not be nutritionally equal. I'm a dietitian. I know way too much about the fiber and fat content of foods. But if we make them morally equal, we're less likely to obsess over them and we can better stay in control. And second, we need to get rid of any strict conditions surrounding food. So for example, thinking, oh, I'll eat this today, but I'll have to work out another hour tomorrow. As soon as you start allowing yourself food freedom, you take away the power food has on you and you really decrease the chances of overeating. So are you going to overeat at first? Yeah. Probably, as you're essentially going off the diet, which we know from our experience tends to lead us to overeat. But once you become accustomed to being around all types of foods, they actually start to lose their specialness. So what does the research say about this working? Now, at first, this will seem like a huge challenge. But remember, it takes time to dispel all of the diet culture BS that's been fed to us for years and years. As you start to take the power away from food, you will naturally feel less inclined to eat it all of the time. In fact, even if you allowed yourself to eat a lot of Cheetos, you're eventually gonna get tired of them. Research calls this phenomenon habituation. Basically, the more a person is exposed to a food, the less appealing that food becomes. A good example is if you're going on vacation. You're going to a resort and you see a huge table of all you can eat food, all your favorite foods. So you're probably going to fill your plate with a lot of these foods. I've done it. You've probably done it. We've all been there. But as the days go on, you might actually start to gravitate towards having a salad or maybe some fruit for breakfast. You probably won't create a whole mountain of food on your plate near the end of your holiday. And it's often that the novelty and excitement factor can cause us to overeat. But if we're used to it and we're no longer assigning that moral value to food, those foods just become normal and totally less exciting. This was found in a 2011 study in which participants were given mac and cheese daily or weekly for 5 weeks. Yum. So the research showed that participants that had the mac and cheese daily slowly started to eat smaller and smaller portions. On the other hand, those that were given the mac and cheese weekly ate similar amounts throughout the research project. The authors attributed this to a phenomenon known as the sometimes opponent processes theories to habituation. Basically, when a food is introduced, a memory for this food is created and activated to a high level, called the A1 state. However, the memory eventually starts to decay over time and enters an A2 state. If a food is introduced shortly after when it's in the A2 state, the stimuli for this food won't be as strong. However, if enough time has gone by that the person has limited memory of the food, then they go right back to the excited state of this food and therefore have a higher drive to eat it. What I'm saying is, by allowing yourself regular access to all the foods, they kind of lose their novelty and you don't feel such a drive to overeat them. Also keep in mind that we constantly fall victim to self-fulfilling prophecies. Simply believing that you're going to fail almost always leads to our perception of us failing. So believing that being around chocolate will cause you to overindulge may cause you to overindulge. You need to develop trust within yourself that you can do this. You are capable of listening to your body. This intuitive eating journey is all about rebuilding your relationship with both food and yourself. Now, one question I know I'm going to get is, what if you only want junk food? Now, first of all, part of this exercise or step in the intuitive eating protocol is to try to not think of it as junk food. The goal in this stage of intuitive eating training is to treat all food exactly the same. So while I know that it's in our culture's vocabulary, the best thing you can do is ditch that kind of talk. When we get to gentle nutrition and honoring our health, we will do a deeper dive into which foods better support our physical and mental well-being. Second, when you're given free choice, you may feel like you have an all-access ticket to eat unhealthy food, and you do. Now, you may enjoy some extra fun foods for the first little bit, But over time, you're likely going to start to crave variety and what legitimately feels good to your body. We will be chatting more about this in an upcoming episode, so definitely stay tuned for that. Now, Abby, giving up structure is way too overwhelming for me. Can we tackle this in baby steps? Yes. I know that this is super scary for people, so sometimes I do recommend some baby steps to help neutralize these trigger foods, as we sometimes call them. Breaking it down into some baby bites sometimes feels a lot more manageable than the lofty idea of just throwing caution to the wind on everything. So choose one food to start with, and let's attack this with some structure. In my book, The Mindful Glow Cookbook, I disclose that my trigger food used to be sugary cereal. If it was in the house, I would eat it mindlessly all day long. So as a result, I just wouldn't buy it out of fear that I would lose control. So my intuitive eating journey with it started with me buying some cereal. Then I told myself I could have cereal every single day if I wanted. And I did. I did want cereal. The first day I found I had my breakfast with cereal, and I still wanted to kind of snack on it later on in the day, just like out of the bag. But soon enough, I actually didn't have that desire to snack on it, and I wasn't even that excited in the morning anymore to have my sugary cereal breakfast. It very quickly just became another food. One I enjoyed, but not one that I was like obsessed over, and I started to implement some gentle nutrition. I noticed that I was hungry soon after having my cereal, so I started to mix it with some bran cereal or some Greek yogurt to really up the satiety factor. And then honestly, the next time we just ran out of sugary cereal in the house, I kind of just forgot to buy it again. It lost its power. It really was no longer so enticing. Once you've had success neutralizing your big trigger food, you'll maybe have a little bit more newfound confidence that this can be applied to other foods that you have either consciously or unconsciously restricted, or you're viewing through a moral lens. For this week's homework, I want you to start reintroducing foods that you've previously restricted. Here's how. Number 1, write down a list that are appealing to you. Number 2, check off any foods that you actually allow yourself to eat regularly, and circle any foods that you've restricted in the past or present. Number 3, plan to allow yourself to eat one of those forbidden foods as much as you want, either at home or in the store or in a restaurant, wherever you want. Number 4, while you eat the food, check in with yourself. Think, is this as good as I remember? If it is, then of course, continue to allow yourself to have it from now on. If it's not, which honestly is common, then it could be that your history of deprivation has caused you to put it on a pedestal in the first place. This is how I feel personally about Halloween candy. I used to crave it all the time when I was restricting sugar, but it literally does not taste good to me anymore, and I can easily have it in the house and ignore it. You can start with just one food if you're more comfortable before tackling another one on your list, or you can go all in if that feels easier to you. Everyone's going to be different. I want this to be your journey and to take it at the pace that you're comfortable with. And if it gets too scary, then you just need to take a step back. That is okay too. You are not failing. Even proving to yourself that you no longer are obsessed with cheese or cupcakes or cookies is usually really good data to prove that other foods also don't deserve so much power either. Now, before I finish, I just want to highlight something really, really important. A lot of criticism around intuitive eating is that it promotes overeating and overindulgence of food. The idea of intuitive eating is to make peace with food and to welcome any kind of food into your diet. It's not about overdoing it and eating whatever you want, whenever you want, and however much you want. But here's the difference. It's actually about listening to your body's needs. You have permission to eat whatever you want, but doing so without listening to how your body feels will not be a satisfying experience. Sometimes some emotional eating is normal. And the key here is to not punish yourself to fall back into that binge, restrict, repeat cycle. But if you're eating beyond your needs all the time, or you're relying too heavily on food as an emotional coping mechanism, that's not supporting your health either. I mean, it's not a fun experience when you're sick to your stomach. And ultimately, food does not solve all of our problems. This is a situation where I would suggest speaking to a therapist, even if you're not physically restricting food and just seemingly overeating. There may be some psychological restriction going on, and trying to force your relationship with food into a neutral zone without addressing some of this will likely keep you trapped in the diet cycle. Remember that intuitive eating takes time to learn, and it's really about respecting your body's natural cues. So continue to work on these steps throughout the intuitive eating journey, and stay tuned for our next video on principle number 4, challenge the food police. So guys, as always, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to give it the thumbs up. Leave me a comment below if you have any questions about intuitive eating or any other kind of topics that you want me to cover in an upcoming video. Subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next time on Abby's Kitchen. Bye.